Sick? Oh, I see. Thanks for your hard work. You can go to the afterlife now.
When I told my husband about my cancer diagnosis, he laughed carelessly and said this.
Now we can finally be free.
Following my husband's lead, even my son said something like this. At that moment, the two people I had always considered family appeared like monsters to me. Oh, I see. Then I'll grant your wish. Crushed by despair, I made up my mind. But little did they know that it would be my husband and son who would end up regretting everything. They could never have imagined it at that time. My name is Kate. I'm just an ordinary working wife. My family consists of my husband and our son. It might sound odd coming from me, but I think I was doing my part fairly well as a member of the family. When we had our child, my husband, Sam, said,
I'd like to focus on work while leaving the household and child rearing to you.
I promptly quit my job and became a full-time housewife. As our son, Chris, grew up and expenses for his education and extracurricular activities increased, I was asked, could you start working again? Without hesitation, I started a part-time job. I believed it was my duty to support my family, and I thought I was fulfilling that role. At least, that's what I believed. If I'm going to work, you should help out a bit with housework and childcare too. Unfortunately, the promise I made with my husband before starting my part-time job was never fulfilled. Sam always found some excuse, like working overtime, and came home late at night. By the time he returned, most of the housework was already done, and our child was asleep. Because of that, there was nothing for him to help with. This situation continued for over 3 months, and I quickly gave up expecting anything from him. Still, I could justify it by thinking, I spend more time at home, so it makes sense for me to handle most of it. The real issue was my husband's leniency toward our son.
Chris seems interested in piano. You know, one of my colleagues' wives is a piano teacher and is apparently looking for students. Why don't you let him try?
He would nonchalantly say things like this, and I can't even count how many times I was left speechless.
Parents should let their kids experience everything. That's what being a good parent is all about.
That was Sam's philosophy on parenting, always respecting Chris's wishes. If Chris wanted to do something, Sam let him do it. If Chris wanted something, Sam bought it for him. On the surface, he seemed like a great father. But the problem was, he never thought about the responsibilities that came with it. Extracurricular activities can be quite expensive, depending on the type. They often require managing supplies or even transportation if the location is far. Sam simply provided the opportunities and left everything else to me, using excuses like, I'm too tired from work, or, I don't really understand how to handle it. One time, when Chris was in the upper grades of elementary school, I decided to confront my husband. I opened the household budget book in front of him and tried to discuss our finances.
Huh? What's this all of a sudden? I'm busy right now.
Busy? You mean busy looking at private middle school pamphlets? That's awfully carefree of you. I was so frustrated that I couldn't help but make a sarcastic comment. Sam glared at me, clearly irritated. But I was the one who had every right to be upset. We can't afford to send Chris to a private school, you know.
I was just looking at it. Besides, if he says he wants to go, I'd like to let him.
Do you have any idea how much the tuition will cost? The more serious I became, the more irritated Sam looked.
What the hell? So Chris has to give up on the school he wants to go to just because we don't have the money? Isn't that pathetic as a parent?
It's fine to want to fulfill every wish, but it takes both money and time. With just the two of us, this isn't realistic, is it? Sam worked at a prestigious trading company and was a section manager at the time, so his income wasn't bad. We only had one child, so there was no need to be stingy. That's probably how Sam saw it. But even so, we weren't wealthy enough to spend money like water. And no matter how you look at it, my burden is much heavier.
Huh? What's that supposed to mean?
That was what I most wanted to convey during that conversation. I manage the housework, participate in community activities, serve as a PTA officer, accompany Chris to his extracurricular activities, and work part-time in the spare time I can find. That's how we're managing to maintain our current lifestyle.
Hey, don't act like you're the only one who's struggling. I work late into the night every single day, and it's because of that you can put food on the table.
Looking back, maybe if I had expressed myself differently, my husband might have been more willing to listen. But the truth is, I was so overwhelmed that I didn't even have the mental space to do so. My husband, who seemed blind to how hard I was working, let out a big sigh.
Kate, you just work a little part-time, stay home most of the day, and I'm letting you take it easy. What's there to complain about?
It's fine if you can't understand my burden. But look at reality. Even with both your income and mine, we can't afford any more freedom than this. I pushed the household budget book toward him again as I said this. If we want to continue giving Chris the freedom to pursue his education and activities, we'll have to make up the difference somewhere else. Should we cut your allowance?
Whoa, what the hell? Why don't you think about working more hours or something? Can't you try harder for the sake of your kid?
The tense and unpleasant atmosphere made me dizzy, as did his complete inability to understand.
You're going to make your kid give up things just because you can't earn enough? That's pathetic. Poor Chris.
That was the moment I gave up trying to have any meaningful discussions with my husband. Thinking back, it was probably sometime after that when things began to change. Not just my husband. My son started treating me lightly as well.
Hey! Why haven't you washed this uniform? I need it for today's club practice.
What? You never told me that. By the time Chris entered middle school, he had stopped calling me Mom.
You should just know my club schedule without me having to tell you. Geez, you're useless.
Calling it a rebellious phase would have been too kind. His behavior was downright outrageous. But he was still my son, and I couldn't ignore him.
One of my co-workers' wives has 3 kids, works full-time, and still handles everything at home.
My friend's mom is beautiful and works from home too. Ours is just a deadbeat.
Even when the two of them bonded over such conversations, I had grown used to pretending I didn't hear them from the kitchen. It's fine. Having a family, no matter the form, is still better than nothing. My parents divorced when I was very young. I don't know all the details, but it seems there were many issues, such as financial problems and mutual infidelity. Apparently, they hadn't planned on having children, but I was born anyway, as if by bad luck. I've even had that said to my face. After the divorce, neither of my parents wanted custody of me, so I was passed around among relatives. That's why I longed to build a happy family of my own. In my youth, I attended matchmaking parties and group dates almost every week, which is how I eventually met my husband. Because of this background, I held on to the hope of a warm and happy family for far too long. But one day, I finally came to realize something. Hoping for that from my husband and son was utterly meaningless. When Chris was in his third year of high school, during the summer, I started to experience frequent health issues. I was in my mid-40s and thought it was just due to aging, but my body gradually stopped functioning properly, and it began to affect my work. My boss and part-time colleagues were kind people and suggested, "Why don't you use some vacation time to rest for a while?" However, as you might expect, my husband and son's attitude while I rested at home was far from understanding. No matter how unwell I felt, slacking on housework was unacceptable. If I said, "I can't," they would hurl merciless insults at me. Useless. Lazy. Good-for-nothing parasite. They called me every insult imaginable. At that time, I didn't even have the energy to fight back. Perhaps emboldened by my lack of resistance, my husband began spending his days off drinking and going out, and my son stayed out late every night. When I finally dragged myself to the hospital, it was because no amount of rest restored my energy, and I couldn't even eat anymore. Wait. Hospitalization? I remember being frozen in shock in the doctor's office as the physician looked at me with a puzzled expression. The doctor even said, "You really didn't think anything was wrong," in a tone of disbelief. What they found in my body was cancer. I was told to contact my family immediately, so I called my husband and son in a hurry. Since I had to be admitted to the hospital right away and couldn't go home, I reluctantly asked them to bring me the things I needed.
Sick? Huh, I see. So, what do you need? What should I do?
I expected sarcasm, but surprisingly, my husband's attitude was mild. While he didn't offer any kind words, he didn't dismiss me with "I don't care" or complain about it being a hassle. It was unusual for him to even consider what he needed to do.
I'll come right away.
My son also ended the call without saying much else. Could they actually be worried about me? For a moment, I thought so, but I quickly regretted even entertaining the idea. It's like how, after being whipped for years, a single piece of candy feels like a huge reward. I felt pathetic for even thinking that way.
Good job. You can go to the afterlife now.
The moment he arrived in my hospital room, my husband carelessly dropped a large bag of clothes on the floor and cheerfully said this.
Once the nagging one's gone, we can finally do whatever we want.
My son, who arrived at almost the same time, smiled as he spoke to my husband. For a moment, I couldn't comprehend what they were saying. Wait. That's not funny, even as a joke. Barely managing to control my trembling lips, I responded quietly, even though I had long realized this was no joke.
Do you still seriously think you're needed here?
Huh? What's that supposed to mean? Sam, say something. I turned to my husband, pleading. He scratched his head as if annoyed and said,
Don't drag me into this. Sorry, but what we said, that's how we really feel.
In that instant, it felt as if something split my head wide open.
I guess you were trying hard to get Chris and me to like you. But honestly, that just made you annoying.
I get it. You always had this indifferent look, like nothing could bother you. It was so obvious you were desperate to be liked.
As the two of them hit it off and laughed together, I could only stand there in stunned silence.
While you were slacking off on housework, we realized the household runs just fine without you. Chris can handle his own stuff too.
Exactly. So don't worry about it. Stay in the hospital as long as you want.
Laughing, my husband said,
Hey, but that's going to rack up hospital bills, isn't it?
As the two of them left the hospital room together. What happened after that is a bit of a blur, but I think someone must have helped me as I stood there, frozen. From then on, neither my husband nor my son visited me during my hospitalization, not even on the day of my surgery. When I was alone in the hospital room, it felt like I was living in a dream, detached from reality. What was I working so hard for? Every day, I repeated this thought, but no answer came, and I would give up thinking about it, only to repeat the cycle. At times, I even thought, maybe it wouldn't be so bad if the surgery failed, and I could quietly end my life alone. For the first time, I truly understood what despair felt like. So why am I still alive now? The answer lies in the events that followed. To summarize, my surgery was a success. The recovery went smoothly, and my health was completely restored. According to the doctor, my cancer was in its early stages. I only needed to stay in the hospital for about 2 weeks, and the surgery was relatively simple. After being discharged, I didn't return home. Instead, I started living alone in a different place. During that time, my husband and son tried contacting me multiple times, but I ignored every message. After all, they didn't need me, so there shouldn't have been any problem. As the seasons changed and March came, I received a message saying my son had failed his university entrance exams. Several voicemail messages followed, accusing me, "It's your fault. Come apologize in person." I grew tired of their incessant complaints, so I decided to meet them. However, I wasn't about to pay for the travel expenses to visit them. I sent them a message instead, "If you want to talk, come here."
Hey, you're 5 minutes late. And where have you been all this time? Acting all selfish.
Seriously. You ignored us all this time and then dragged us out to a place like this. Are you even sorry?
The two of them had come to the family restaurant I had specified, and the insults began the moment we met. "No, I'm not," I replied casually as I plopped down in my seat. Both of them looked shocked. Sure, they were probably upset that I had called them to a location 2 train stops away and had even shown up late. But strangely, I didn't feel the slightest bit of guilt. After all, the two of you said you'd be fine without me. So what are you so angry about?
Well, that's...
Perhaps remembering their own words, both of them looked a little uncomfortable.
So, what? You disappeared out of spite? What kind of mother does that?
And what of it? Is that all you have to say? I replied indifferently, which seemed to irritate them further. They both wore expressions of anger.
Do you have any idea how hard things have been for us?
From there, my husband and son began recounting their struggles over the past month, explaining how much they had suffered. Apparently, since I left, the house has fallen into complete disarray. Trash piles up, laundry doesn't get done, the water areas are filthy and unusable, and even the meals are terrible.
Because of that, I couldn't concentrate on studying and failed my entrance exams. It's all your fault.
Pfft. Stop it. You're killing me. I tried to hold it in, but I couldn't anymore. At my son's words, I burst out laughing. It's my fault? Are you serious? The same people who claimed they didn't need me were now blaming me for their inability to manage, and I found it absolutely ridiculous. Housework. You can handle it yourselves. If work keeps you busy, then spend some money and hire a service.
Of course, we already tried that. But those guys just take your money and give terrible service.
Sam mumbled excuses, but I had a pretty good idea of what he was trying to say. At first, I'm sure they must have enjoyed having the annoying person out of their lives. But over time, housework piled up, and they couldn't continue doing nothing. While I was resting at home before my hospital stay, I had been doing the bare minimum of housework during the day when they were out. As a result, the house was always clean and tidy. By the time they returned in the evening, I was already lying down to rest, which likely made them think, the house runs fine even if she does nothing. Who do you think kept the house clean and made your meals? Did they believe some magical fairy was taking care of the housework? Of course, no such thing exists, and neither of them could manage housework themselves. That left hiring a service as their only option. However, most housekeeping services only provide work that matches the time and money they're paid for. If you pay, they'll cook, clean, and do laundry for you. What's the problem? As it turned out, they found it bothersome to have to communicate detailed instructions to the service and deal with extra charges for additional tasks. From my perspective, it was an obvious reality. If you want a higher level of service, you need to pay more. Unable to afford the level of service they wanted, they had to lower their standards of living.
You knew this would happen and still didn't come back. I don't know where you've been, but if this was to spite us, that's called harassment.
Oh.
What's with your attitude? You're still living off our savings, aren't you? You know, unauthorized separation can be grounds for divorce. I'm fine with ending it.
As soon as I heard those words, I reached into my bag, as if I'd been waiting for this moment. With a smile, I pulled out the document I had prepared, divorce papers. That makes things easier. Let's get divorced. Both my husband and son stared at me in shock, their eyes wide as they simultaneously said, "What?" I had already been preparing for divorce long before Sam ever brought it up. I've been living alone back in my hometown. I quit my old job and started a new one. I used the household savings for the down payment, so if you want me to pay it back, I will.
What? When? Why?
It was the patients I shared a hospital room with who gave me the courage to cut ties with my family. Most of them were older women who had already raised their children. They noticed how down I was and encouraged me. They all said things like, "You're still young. Dump those two men and move on with your life. There's no need to cling to a family that's only family in name." If it weren't for them, I might have truly disappeared from this world. Thanks to my years as a housewife, I was able to get a job with a housekeeping service. It feels amazing to have someone appreciate my work. As they began to grasp the reality of their situation, my husband and son's faces turned pale. "So as you can see, I don't need you to take care of me at all."
Wait. But what about Chris? He's your son.
My husband clutched Chris's shoulder as he tried to appeal to me. He likely hoped to make me feel guilty, as he used to by saying, "Think of your son." But unfortunately for him, I no longer felt any pangs of guilt. He's not a child anymore. It's time he takes responsibility for what he says and does. I glanced at my son as I said this, but he simply averted his eyes, looking uncomfortable. "Is that all? If so, I'm leaving now. I've already signed my part of the divorce papers, so you just need to fill out your section."
Wait. Please. Come back. We can't do anything without you.
My husband, who had been yelling moments earlier, suddenly began to cry.
I envied you for always being in a comfortable home. I didn't see anything clearly. You always made my wishes come true, so I got carried away, and then...
He confessed that when I didn't meet his expectations, he would feel frustrated and angry. Had he realized this sooner and offered even one sincere word of apology and gratitude, my feelings might have leaned back toward our family.
But apologizing felt like losing.
So even now, you can't bring yourself to bow your head? When I pointed this out, my husband's face froze in realization, and I couldn't help but feel deeply exasperated.
Mom, I'm sorry for taking you for granted all this time. Please come back.
Hearing my son finally speak, I was a little surprised. That son of mine, apologizing so humbly? Their home must have become truly unbearable. But whether his apology came from genuine regret or self-interest, I couldn't tell. And frankly, I didn't care anymore. You don't need to apologize. No matter what you say, I have no intention of returning. I stated this firmly, and both my husband and son widened their eyes in shock, looking more sorrowful than I had ever seen them. I used to think that families should stick together no matter what, but I've realized it's a pointless effort.
Please. I'm sorry. I'll make it up to you. Please come back.
Even as he desperately apologized, I thought, he's still not listening to me. Thank you for playing along with my little game of family. That was the only thing I said that came from my heart, without malice. I had been trying to fill the emptiness from my childhood by creating a family of my own. But now that I understood that, I realized it would be cruel to keep binding these two to my illusion. I don't need anything from you. If you want, I'll even pay alimony. Just think of me as having gone to the afterlife and let me go. I no longer felt sadness or anger toward them, just indifference. Sensing my feelings, my husband and son said nothing more, slumping in defeat. If you need anything else, contact me through this. I handed them my lawyer's business card and left without another word, leaving the two of them behind. Thank you for playing along with my little game of family. I replied. You can't contact someone who's gone to the afterlife. After that, I heard nothing further. From what I've heard from old neighbors, my ex-husband and son are like shells of their former selves. Sam, unable to perform well at work, was branded as a miserable man whose wife left him. He's now mostly at home, likely unemployed or retired. As for my son, he became unruly, driving his friends away. As for me, I'm thriving in my housekeeping service job. It's fulfilling, and I've even taken on leadership roles. The joy of being appreciated for my hard work gives me the energy and satisfaction I never had before. What did you think of this story? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to the channel. See you in the next video.